So, hello everyone, and welcome back to the CMHA podcast series. We are very excited to be recording our February episode today with a very special guest, Nadene Joy. After initially pursuing a career in geology, Nadene is now a global mindset strategist and the CEO of Nadene Joy Consulting, the chair and founder of the Global Lead to Impact Summit, and the author of Uncover Your Purpose, Heal and Share Your Gifts with the World. On top of these involvements, Nadene also sits as the director on the board of Maybell Developments, an organization combating homelessness, and ICF, which leads the advancement of professional coaching in Saskatchewan as the communications director. With Nadine's amazing life experiences and ability to help business professionals no longer be stuck from experiencing the life and business success they desire, we are so lucky to have Nadene join our conversation today. Thank you so much for being with us today, Nadene.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Amazing. So I guess we can just jump right into the questions. So the first question we'd love to hear you speak to is if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and particularly your experience with mental health and how it's impacted your life.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I worked as a geologist for quite a few years, and I basically, when you're talking about mental health, that was something that I worked. I was a workaholic. I worked 80 hours a week. I was constantly, working and doing things that weren't necessarily aligned with who I was, and ended up over the course of almost a decade working in this profession, getting sick, and starting my career as basically a parenting coach is where I started my career. And through that process, realized that there's this multi-generational patterning that gets passed down from one generation to the next, and learned very quickly it's not just parents that have this, but everybody, and branched out into life coaching, business coaching, helping people start their businesses based on who they are, and working with clients all over the world, businesses all over the world, leaders all over the world, and branching out even further to become a leadership consultant, speaker, author, trainer, and now also with a wellness organization that we have just started up as well, with working with mental health and trying to take the stigma out of mental health and focus on wellness right now in our world, simply because we're wanting to focus on the solutions instead of the problems. And I think it's something that's really needed right now, and something that we really all can benefit from is, our well-being and the way that we show up in the world each and every day.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it speaks to us and our audience, I think, for sure, because that's what we're always driving to do, is reduce that stigma surrounding mental health and mental illness. So it's amazing to hear you speak to, and like you touched on, like it's now more important than ever, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. With everything that's been going on in our world, the pandemic, everybody's been isolated. We're all, in this, I don't even like the word, social distancing. It's just, we're distanced away from people, but I think it's still so important, even though we're, we have Zoom, we have these, video conferencing that we can utilize. And I think utilizing that as much as we can right now to still stay connected to the best ability that we can. It's not the same as being, you and I being in the same room talking to one another, but it's the next best thing. And the more we can stay connected that way, the better, because it's just really important that nobody feels alone. Nobody feels like, they have to go through the struggles that they're going through right now by themselves, that there is people out there that we care for you. We're listening to you, and make sure that you don't think that you're the only one going through things, because there's so many other people that are going through exactly what you are, or something, even worse than where you're at. And it's just important to reach out for help, reach out to somebody you trust, just to talk to them. And that means the world to somebody, reach out to people if you know they're by themselves. It's just really important right now more than ever to make sure that those people, especially if you are by yourself or, isolated, or if you're not necessarily like everybody, really just continually to reach out and talk to people, and just say, hey, how are you doing? How's it going today? How can I help you? Can you talk? Do you have 5 minutes just to touch base? I'd love to hear what you've been up to, and let you know what I've been up to, and just have a conversation with them, right? That's something so simple, but yet it's something that can make a huge difference in somebody's lives when they're struggling mentally.
Absolutely.
So just on to our next question, I think to talk just a bit more about your background, if you could just tell us, how did your career kind of transition from geology into mental health consulting? And if you could just tell us a bit more about your company, your book, and any aspects of your career experience that you wanted to highlight.
Of course. Yeah. So like I said, I was a geologist and I worked. So I'll go into a little bit more depth into my story of what I've just covered already. And I'm going to go back actually to grade 12 and when I went and was starting university, because this is a really important aspect to my story and how, it ended up, so many years later doing the same thing. So I actually wanted to be a psychologist right out of grade 12. I took I think I had 5 classes in psychology at the time. I spoke upon the suggestions of the professors at the university. They said, you know what, it would be very beneficial if you can speak with the counselors just to get an idea of what you want to be and, help you make sure you have all the credits you need, all these things to check the boxes. I went and talked to the counselor, and basically what was told to me was, if you want to be a psychologist, that's fine. But just so you know, the only jobs that are out there to work as a psychologist is to be a professor at a university and write and do peer reviews and write papers your entire life. And it really took me back, because I had thought my entire life, and this is just my own perception, but the perception that was told to me from the counselor wasn't necessarily the only perception. It was just her view and her opinion on being a psychologist. But I really wanted to help people. I really wanted to be a psychologist so that I could help others. And when I heard, research professor, doing articles my entire life, that wasn't necessarily my idea of helping people. So I let that one person basically determine my entire career. And I said, okay, well, I'll finish my minor. I got my minor in psychology. And I said, okay, next. Now I went down the next road. What am I going to take next? Ended up same thing. Biology, heard the same thing again, kept going, as to there's no jobs, all this, the things that the counselors tell you, listen to them. Ended up in geography, worked in that for a few months. I didn't want to do that. So I ended up in geology, was where I ended up after, 2 or 3 different times of changing my career. I ended up graduating top of my class in geology. I ended up doing my honors. I ended up winning several awards of achievement. I ended up being, selected to represent our province at, it's called the SIF trip, Student Industry Field Trip, where there's one student from each university that's represented nationwide across Canada. And I was one of those students at, 21 years old, 22 years old, that got to go and had the privilege of working with top CEOs. Even there was billionaires that were there flying over the Rocky Mountains, all these things that I had the opportunity at such a young age to be immersed in. And I had this perception, and I think the perception was formed not like way before this point in my life, maybe even from childhood, of what success looked like. And in order to be successful, again, going back to the boxes, what boxes did I need to check? And if I checked off, okay, I got a degree, that's one check. Okay, I did my honors, another check. Okay, I graduated top of my class, that's another check. I won awards. Okay, another check. Okay, now I got to work with these top CEOs, another check. Okay, now I'm going to, the way you dress, the way you act, the way you speak, everything it felt like, and at this point in my life, I didn't quite understand it, but it was like I was being programmed in a way to act and be and talk a certain way in order to be accepted from everybody else in that community. And I forgot about who I was. So anyways, the long story short, I ended up getting a job with a global company. I actually worked in the oil rigs for 10 months out in the field, which literally was the hardest job that I've ever done in my entire life. I was a new person and I worked basically all night long, 20-hour shifts. So another thing, I was a woman in geology. So I worked with 99.999% men my entire career. So that was a whole nother thing we're not going to get into today, but there's a lot of things that I learned simply around that. And I had no problem working it and doing, in that field. I loved it. But there was something, again, that was missing, and ended up getting headhunted, worked with this company, acquisitions, basically got to work with the executive team, investors, board of directors, all these people. And this again was, when I was 23-ish years old, and I was now sitting at executive boardroom tables with top executives in a company that I had now worked with. And it wasn't just school anymore. It wasn't just, okay, you won this award to go work with these people. It's now, this is your job. This is what you're doing full-time every day, 24 hours, not 24 hours a day, but, 7 days a week or 5 days a week or whatever, however many hours a week you work. And I ended up getting to the point where, I liked what I did. But again, going back to psychology, I really liked interacting with people and being able to communicate with people and be able to understand that component. And over the course of the years, I ended up getting really sick. And there was one morning when I woke up and I literally couldn't get out of bed. I was 28 years old at the time. Again, I had everything, all the boxes. I owned shares in the company. I had everything I could have ever wanted in a job, like the titles, the letters, everything that I would look at from the outside in and say, wow, you have everything, but yet I felt like there was still this massive void inside of me that wasn't happy. And I woke up and I basically woke up. I couldn't get out of bed. I had this excruciating pain, like somebody was taking a knife and was literally stabbing me over and over and over in the side of my stomach. I couldn't even get out of bed. And I knew in that moment that, so when I was 28 years old, I basically retired my career as a professional geologist. And I now was on the search of trying to get better, trying to figure out, it's like I was starting my whole life over again. And it was like, now what am I going to do? Well, what is my purpose? Why am I really here if I'm not a geologist? And I had in my mind, like our parents, many of our parents had the same job for 30 years, right? And then they just retired. That's how I thought about myself as a geologist. I'm going to be a geologist my entire life. That's going to be my career and I'll be good, right? That's kind of the mentality that I had. And boy, was I wrong. I was so wrong. And I had no idea at this point in my life what was to come. And I went through a year and a half of just trying to get better, working with the medical system, not knowing what to do, working with psychologists, psychiatrists, top professionals, spending a lot of the money that I had just made to try and come into the search to figure out what's actually wrong, because nobody could figure out what was wrong. They did tests and things came back normal. And eventually, after a year and a half, I recognized that it was about this part of me that I hadn't honored. And I saw when I was 4 years old that I was quite different from everybody else, that I had big visions, that I just knew things about people, that even as a 4-year-old, I remember just thinking, I want to change the world. Like, I want to do big things. I want to help people. I want to do all of this. And then looking around me and then everybody around me, nobody was talking like that. Nobody was using the words that I was using. And I was like, well, you know what? I think I don't want to be me anymore. I don't want to repress everything of who I was. And I didn't realize this until I had gotten sick, but it was from age 4 years old to 28 years old. So 24 years of my life that I lived based on what everybody else outside of me expected of me versus what I really knew in my heart and why I was actually here, what my real purpose was, which was to help people, to make a difference in the world. And I realized that and recognized that. Once I recognized that, I got better. This is 15 years ago now. I haven't really had a cold. I haven't been sick. Like, I've literally been healed from the inside out. So it's just a really strong testimony in how important it is to really honor yourself and what makes you happy, what brings you joy, who really are you outside of what everybody else tells you, what society, what movies, what music, what friends, what family, what everybody else, like forgetting about everything else and just really going deep into your heart and listening and hearing, like, what am I here for? Like, what are the things that I really like to do when I wake up in the morning? What just makes me smile and makes me just want to, I could just do, if I didn't get paid, what would I do today? And that's how I looked at that. And I ended up getting better, going through that, the massive realization of honoring who I was and coming back to that and realizing that it's not outside of us. It's not anything external that can make us happy. It's everything inside of us that allows us to have the joy, have the happiness, have the relationships, the people around us. Like, these things showed me, again, going through this experience, how important it is to really honor yourself and to get to that place. So that's a little bit more in depth, but the internal versus the external, and always living from inside of you versus outside of you, looking from the inside out, not the outside in.
Mm-hmm. I think that story is so inspiring, and I can relate to that feeling so much, of feeling yourself starting to go down a path just because other people are maybe like purposely or unpurposely making you think that's where you should be going, or this is what you should be interested in, and whatever it may be. And I think that makes that story so inspiring, the fact that you're able to identify that's kind of what happened and then turn it around and really do, again, like pursue your purpose. I think that's really amazing. And I actually think it ties into our next question as well, when you're speaking to kind of how the perception of your high school counselor, and as well as your personal perspective on defining success, really drove the initial career path that you took. So our next question is, what have you learned about perspective throughout your life? And what are the key experiences, either elaborating further on the ones you touched on or some other ones, that have helped you expand your understanding of the importance and impact perspective can have?
And I love that you brought in perspective and purpose together, because that is such a key differentiation between the two of them that many people don't even think about. There's a difference between the two. So when we look at perspective, I'm just going to take a moment to define each one, and then we'll go into a couple examples with that. So perspective is the way you see something. So how we see something. You can see something from a different angle. You can see something with the way I'm looking at you, for example, on the camera on Zoom is different than if I was up here looking down at you. Is different, your perspective of looking at me is different than the way I look at you. And sometimes, it's even about a very brief example would be, if you think, if you have children, or if you ever babysit children in your life, and you look at maybe the fact that toys or technology might corrupt the children's minds. You might look at a toy store as something as being evil, or an electronics store as being something that's evil, versus somebody that doesn't have that perspective about toys or about electronics. So it changes the way we actually look at life, and our perception, our perspectives are formed from 0 to 7 years old as a child. So the things that you were surrounded by the messages, again, the movies, the things your parents told you, friends, relatives, all of these things form your perceptive, how you have this perception of things in your life. And it's actually very, very powerful to be able to see that, and to really look through that, and look through like this lens through a perspective, but know that you can always change that perspective. Just because you've been brought up with that certain perspective doesn't mean that you have to remain and stay in that perspective. You have a power to utilize to move higher, to go to a higher perspective, and start, looking down on what that actually is, and change that if that's something that no longer suits who you are, or again, going back to that inside out to what really makes you happy. Purpose, on the other hand, is, the reason why we do something, for which we do something, why it's created, why something exists. It can be a goal, or maybe even something that a person is trying to become. So when we think about purpose, most things we normally comes to our mind is, what is your purpose? Somebody might ask, why is your purpose for living? What is your life's purpose? And that might be something, where you can say, that's what, when I get up in the morning, that's the one thing, or the two things, or the three things that really motivate me, push me forward in life, that if I didn't have anything else and I just had those things, that I would still be okay. And looking at it like that, there's different types of purposes. You have a mission, like we each have our own individual missions that we have. We have you've heard like business mission statements, vision statements. When you're creating a business, it's about defining what your personal purpose, your personal mission is first, before you can even think about creating a business. You need to think about who you are. What are your morals? What are your values? What are things that make you tick? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And going deep into that, and really being able to, determine the parts of you that make you happy. And once you do that, then your business will come. It's not about looking what everybody else's business, what they're doing. It's about going inside and finding, for just using a business as an example, you can use it for anything, but finding a business that is aligned completely with you. And when you do that, your business will become successful. You will have people coming to you, knocking down your door, wanting to work with you, because they will know, they will feel, they will experience something different with your company than everybody else is out there that you might be in competition with. And I just want to touch on this. And I don't think we touched on this before when we talked, but the whole idea of competition, that there's no need for competition, that there's more than enough out there in our world for everybody. There's no need to compete with one another. And I just really wanted to nail that in for your listeners today, This is something that took me a long time to recognize. And I would look somebody who's successful and say, oh, wow, they're way up here, and put them on pedestals. But recognizing that they're people too, they're going through things just like you and I are going through things. We're all one, we're all in this together. And again, that there's more than enough for anybody, everybody in the world to go around. We each have our own unique gifts, our own unique purposes that only you can help certain people that are out there. That the world needs you to share your purpose and your gifts with them in order for them to see. And it might be your story. It might be a part of your story. It might be your personality. It might be your smile. Like, who knows what it is, right? Who knows what it is? But it's just so important to be yourself and to live your purpose, and to stop searching for those things externally and look within, deep within ourselves, and know that there's, the infinite possibilities that await outside of us.
That's amazing. Thank you. And I think that like touches really well connecting with kind of the student perspective, as many people our age and just in university in general are kind of having a tough time often figuring out where they fit in their career path or where they're going with their life in general. So I think that it builds really well off what you were talking about, how everyone has their own path that they can take, and we can all leverage our own like gifts, experiences, and skills in our own way. So I think maybe more on the mindset side, or just however you think would be best like worded, what advice, maybe one piece of advice for university students, and just like being confident in what they can do and like kind of carving out what their own path is, if that makes sense. That's a little long.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I would say believing in yourself, and stepping in, seeing that door as being already open, and having the courage to walk through that door, whatever that is, whatever life presents to you, and not being afraid of that, not allowing fear to stop you from doing what, sometimes things in life and opportunities that come our way might not be what is expected, but nothing will come your way that you're not ready to already handle. So I would just say, believe in yourself, take the opportunity, let go of the fear, have the courage to walk through that door, and believe in yourself.
I love that. And I think it's really great how you touched on some things that are going to be really great for you aren't planned, because I think some of like my, I don't know, like really great decisions or experiences were things that I didn't plan for, even coming to Queens. I love it here now, but absolutely was not kind of in my radar in terms of schools I want to go to. Neither was a business program. So it's really interesting how sometimes it's like your greatest opportunities and experiences can really come from a place where you weren't expecting, but you just kind of like need to jump into it and put the fear aside. I love that advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. And I really like that piece as well. You're speaking to just how powerful believing in yourself can be. And that's something I think like university age students, at least myself, like you do really struggle with, especially when you're unsure about your passions and what your purpose is something they can struggle with. And something we also touched on previously when we were chatting with you is just the power of communication as well, and how important building trust within your communication can be. So I think that's something we'd love to know about is like, how has being conscious about building trust in your relationships really impacted your life and those relationships, and how can others work to do the same and create trust in their communication as well?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up. This is something that, again, a lot of the things that we're touching on today aren't things that you learn in school. They're the life skills. They're the real life things, right? What is it like once you get outside of the four walls of university and get out into the real world? What are the things that matter most? And I would say, if you're going to take one thing away from this entire interview today, will be what I'm about to say next. And that is the power of effective communication, and being able to effectively communicate with people, and not only people, but different types of people, different types of personalities, depending on, where you're at, and being able to really understand the ability of trust, and being able to, by opening up and becoming authentic, becoming vulnerable, telling, people about things that you might be uncomfortable sharing. That's your story. That's a part of who you are. And when you share that part of you, that authentic part of you, it allows other people to then share their part of their story, of what they may be afraid to share, that they've kept inside of them for so long. That might be, a burden that they're walking around with, this heavy burden on their back that they just had no idea or who they could share, who they could trust in sharing that with. And when we're authentic and we have the ability to communicate with people. And again, so for me, it's about, authenticity. How can you communicate authentically? Through sharing your story, through speaking from your heart, through being real, through, just being yourself, really being yourself. How can you be real? Nobody wants to talk to somebody who, looks like they're perfect, right? It's one of those things that we want people who are real. I've been through things. My dad was an alcoholic. He was a drug addict. I had, there's so many things in my life that I've had to overcome. And I'm more than happy to share my story of what I've gone through, because I know how many people it's already impacted all around the world simply by sharing that. So sharing our story, being authentic, being vulnerable, being real, and then again, not being afraid to open up and tell people things, even the fact of, telling somebody how you appreciate them, just letting people know, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for calling me. I really appreciate, you're just reaching out, right? Sometimes it's just a simple thank you to somebody that can open the doors and communicate and allow them to then reciprocate and to, open doors to something. And you never know where that's going to lead. There might be a relationship that you form with somebody, a trusting relationship that, and this has happened to me many times, years down the road, they will reach back to me and say, hey, there's something, there's an opportunity over here. And I thought of you. I know we haven't talked for a long time, but you and I really connected. And there's that word, connected. When we got along 3 years ago, I thought of you first. And there might be things like that come up in your world. Again, the completely unexpected moments that, allow yourself to really, take yourself out of your comfort zone into the unknown. And it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't have been for that ability to create the relationship first, and the trust and the effective, vulnerable, authentic communication between two people or between a group of people.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such great advice and very relevant, especially in our program. We constantly are hearing that word of networking and the importance of expanding your network. But thus far, my experience has really been like, what I've learned is just like, it's not so important to really grow the size of that network, but just actually have genuine, real connections with people. And those are the ones that are actually going to mean the most to you and actually prosper into the most important relationships, and the ones that you're going to get the most value out of. So I think that's really great advice, and kind of applies to, of course, like those personal relationships, but also in a professional sense as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to, again, the simple concepts in life, right? We don't need to overcomplicate things in our life. It's the whole idea of the quality versus quantity in life, right? If you have a few, really good friends, for example, that you can trust, that you can talk to, that means more than having 100 friends that you talk to once a year, right? It's just, and just speaking from a pure, friend relationship that goes in business, it goes in life, it goes in relationships, it goes in your family, every part of your life, you can bring that back to, it's always about how can you bring and make each situation that you're in better off than what they were before you came there. Like, how can you make each situation better is always my motto that I've lived by from the time I've been little. How can I bring joy? How can I bring just something? It doesn't matter what it is, even if it's just one thing that they learn from being in my presence or from talking to me. How can I help enhance their life in some way, or their business? And that's, again, something that not a lot of people know that. And it's very simple, right? One thing, literally just think every conversation you have, what's that one thing that I can bring to that conversation and that I can leave them with before I go.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Amazing. I think even when you were talking about vulnerability and authenticity, it ties really well into mental health advocacy too, because it's like the best way of destigmatization and kind of making people feel more open to conversation is sharing those authentic and vulnerable stories. And that's how people are really able to like build community and not feel so alone. And obviously that's what we're trying to do here. So I think it's a really nice connection too between that communication aspect and being yourself, and also how truly being yourself can be so uplifting to other people, which is incredible. We can just we can just move on to the next question. So I think we touched a little bit on perfectionism and the perfectionist mindset. So what have you learned about failure and not living to please others throughout your professional and personal experiences? And maybe how has perfectionism kind of impeded this process or had a certain effect on your life?
Yeah, so this is a really big one for me, because my entire life, like I said, from age 4 to 28, I basically lived my entire life based on the illusion of perfectionism. And everything I did, I said, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it. It allowed certain parts of my life that there's many opportunities I missed out on. There was things I procrastinated, projects I would procrastinate. I never did end up finishing because they weren't perfect. So there was a lot of things in my life that I can relate to when you say perfectionism. And to me, it's an illusion, because there's no such thing as perfectionism. There's not one person on the entire planet who is perfect. And we have this illusion too. I wanted to touch on this because I thought this is such an important part and concept to touch on, especially for university students and where you're at in your journey right now, that we think about perfectionism. And this is, again, me included, myself included, for, again, the 24 years that I went through my life, was that I legitimately thought that if I was perfect, that it was going to increase my chance of success. And I think that there's something very powerful in that statement, because when you really think about it, is it really perfectionism that increases your chance of success? Or is it other things, like some of these other things, like communication? Is it the ability to, create trust, relationships with people, all these other things that we've been talking about? To me, now looking back on this many years later, I would say it really has nothing to do with perfectionism. If anything, perfectionism prevented me from really living the best life possible, because I was stressed out, I was overwhelmed, I was anxious all the time, I felt depressed because I was never perfect, because it's never going to happen, no matter how hard I try. Even if I would get good marks, like top marks in the class, even graduating top of my class, there was still a part of me that was like, oh, well, it's still not good enough, right? It's not good enough, even though it to society's standards, that's, if you graduate top of the class, that's good enough. But I still didn't feel good enough, because it's not perfect. I didn't get 100% in my marks. If it's not 100%, it's not perfect. And I think, again, it's such an illusion that we live in society, to think that if we're not perfect, it's ruining your chances of success. That is the biggest lie that our society has told us to date, in my opinion. And I just really wanted to shed truth and shed light on that concept, because it is such a pattern, like a loop that keeps going back and around and around and around and around. And it's just like a hamster wheel. And I think we talked about this before, but literally this hamster wheel that we keep running in around and around and around and around and around. And we never really get anywhere. The only thing that it does is makes us feel like absolutely exhausted, because we're working so hard. We think we work harder, we get better marks, we're going to get a better job. That's not true. I have an example. I have several examples. The one that comes to my mind is a gentleman that I went to school with in geology. He just graduated, just got by 1% from the average. I think it was 66%. And we talked about this before, 66% average. And he ended up, out of our entire graduating class, getting the best job, the best paying job. The job that he loved. He got to travel the world. He got to do all these amazing things. And he was that person that he was just the life of the party. Everybody wanted to be around him. He could communicate. He could get along with anybody. And I just wanted to share that story, because I know of people also who graduated top of their class with full scholarships that couldn't even get a job when they graduated, because they didn't have the life skills. They didn't have the soft skills, the communication skills, because they were so busy studying 24/7 in their room the entire time to get their degree, that they forgot about the rest of the skills that you need. So as a university student in life, it's so important to be well-rounded in many areas.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such amazing advice. And yeah, I just think of sometimes the tendency, or you can kind of feel like the university system and schooling system is set up to make you rely your success on like the grades, or how well you do on a written exam, or whatever it may be. But everybody learns so differently, everyone works so differently, and everyone has different skills and different abilities in various areas. As you were speaking to, like, he was very strong in communication, but not so much on the written exams. And I think sometimes that gets very much overlooked and not spoken to very much in the university setting. But it's something so important to think about in terms of what's actually going to be successful in the real world, and finding where you're really going to excel.
Yeah, exactly. I just have two more really quick points I want to say on perfectionism, just because I think it's such an interesting, important topic to touch on. So many times we don't think about, why do we have a perfectionistic tendency to begin with? What is the root of that? What causes people to feel like they need to be perfect, right? And I just wanted to touch on this because, again, coming from a place and a person that lived almost my entire life with this, for me, it was about, and people I've worked with, studies I've done, research I've done on this, it usually boils down to some sort of need or strive for protection out of, or perfection, sorry, out of the feelings of inadequacy that we have, to be able to prove to ourselves that we are worthy, that we are good enough. There's an underlying belief, and again, an underlying lie in our society that says, if you're not perfect, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're way down here. Whereas that's not true. Again, that's not true at all. And it's not the same thing. So I just wanted to differentiate between perfectionism and being your best, because there's a difference between being perfect and doing and being your best. And I say, and I want to say to everybody listening here, again, this is the second thing I want you to listen to. If you don't listen to anything else, is always do your best, do and be your best, but be all you can be, who you are yourself. And do not know that you need to strive for perfectionism, because perfectionism and doing your best is not the same thing. Perfectionism is not about healthy achievement and growth. Doing your best is. And it's very important to distinguish the difference between the two of those.
Absolutely. I think that's so impactful. And going into our next question. So during these unprecedented times, many students are finding it more difficult than ever to find and create consistency in their lives. When we previously chatted, you mentioned the importance of your morning routine in your life, and setting your daily purpose and the impact that has for you. So could you tell us a little bit more about this routine and share any advice you have for students that are wanting to adopt similar habits?
Yeah, absolutely. So with my morning routine that I have, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't have had this practice in place. Again, over a decade right now, I've been practicing this, and what it consists of for me is waking up in the morning before anybody else in my house wakes up and spending time with myself. It's about removing distractions out of our life, removing our phone, the radio, music, TV, texts from friends, phone calls, all of these things from our life, and choosing a time. And for me, it's usually around 5 or 5:30 in the morning. I usually get up quite early, and that's my time that I've found that there's no distractions. And I wake up. So the first thing that I do is I always have a few minutes of prayer and meditation where I just sit in silence and just allow myself to be there, and allow my thoughts to let go, any judgments, any things that come out. Lots of times our thoughts are so busy. It's just about quieting our mind and to allow ourselves just for a few moments. Again, it can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I usually do about 20, 25 minutes of each of the three things. So meditation and prayer is my first one that I do. And I always sit in prayer and I say, what is my purpose for today? As we were talking about purpose earlier. And I just listen. And it's amazing at how many things pop up in that moment by yourself that you never would have heard if you would have just got up and started, doing things versus just being. It's about being in the moment, being calm, still, and peaceful, and allowing yourself to really listen to, again, the whispers, almost the whispers of your heart, the whispers of your intuition, the part of who you are that, really makes you excited to get up every day. And, every day is an adventure. Like, why not get up and just enjoy life, right? There's things that life is too short to be worrying and just doing things. Like enjoy your life, do the little things, focus on the purpose. And even if it's just one or two things, you don't have to have your whole life figured out. I say start with each day. The second thing that I do is some sort of exercise routine. And again, it's usually the same amount of time that I spend in meditation and prayer. It's always some sort of high level interval training, whether it's going up and down my stairs, doing planks, doing push-ups, whatever it is, just doing something very, very rigorously for those few minutes. And then lastly, the third step of my morning routine that I do every day is some sort of learning, some sort of, whether it's reading a book, whether it's going online, learning something new and choosing a topic, choosing, even if it's a chapter of a book that you want to read, but expanding our mind and working on our personal development to become a better version of ourselves each and every day is so important to continually grow and evolve as a person, as a human, as a business person, as a friend, as a daughter, as all of these things in life. It's just really what, the more we learn, the more we realize we don't learn. The more we learn, the more we realize we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I find that personally, like with the uncertainty of everything going on, I found myself more gravitated towards creating structure and anywhere I can and creating routines and stuff like that. So I think those are some like great tangible suggestions of stuff to add, and hopefully for our listeners as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, I wouldn't be where I am today because all of the business ideas for businesses I've had, people I've been guided to reach out to, all came in those moments when I was still in my morning routine. So like I said, it's very, very powerful. And I do not understate the importance of having that time for yourself every day.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting too, because I tried to like pick up some of those habits, especially in quarantine, because I was reading a book that was talking about like high performance habits for like the most successful people in the world. And it was all about like setting up your day with like the first like 20 or 30 minutes. And it was always talking about like take time to reflect for yourself, whether it's like journaling, meditation, or just going on a walk and thinking, getting active to get your body moving and like your circulation, and then like teaching yourself something new for like 5 minutes. So reading 10 pages of a book or something, and like making that a daily ritual. And it's so interesting because it seems to be very common among people that are like definitely very driven and motivated. So it's really great even to see it, like, because obviously none of the people I'm reading this book about I've ever met. So it's really great to see someone that I'm actually like getting to meet and chat with is like has these practices in their day and like is clearly working. And I also like journal, or try to, like almost every morning, and I love it so much. It's like sets me up for the day. So and that segues nicely into our last question for you. We just wanted to know, since in addition to your morning routine, what other like techniques or practices do you feel are most important to maintain your mental health and well-being throughout the day? And what effects have they had, whether it's keeping you grounded, relieving stress, anything of the sort?
Yeah, so I would say being conscious of your thoughts, and we didn't necessarily touch on mindset that much, so I wanted to touch on it here, that being conscious of your thoughts and thinking positive thoughts and not judging your thoughts. If you happen to have a thought that's negative about yourself or about somebody else, and I always say there's no such thing as good or bad, there's just who knows kind of moments. And I believe that with our thoughts too, right? We have the power to think and choose and act. Like our thoughts become our words become our reality becomes our actions, and our actions become our destiny. So it all starts with our thoughts. And the more we can start to think, it's like, think yourself into your reality. Think what you want as if it's already happening, and allow it. Again, this has happened to me so many times, and I'm speaking from experience, not just from reading this in a book, where there's certain things I'll have visions about that I want to move towards, and I'll start visualizing it, and I'll consistently throughout the day bring those thoughts, bring those actions, bring things that I'm doing, even though I'm not physically doing them. In my mind, it's like I'm already going through the motions, that it's already happened. And it's amazing to see so many times how things have happened almost exactly how I've pictured it in my mind, in real life, in reality. So focusing on your thoughts. Journaling also is very, very beneficial if you take 24 or 48 hours and just observe your thoughts that you're thinking. So this is an exercise for everybody that's listening, that can try, is, whether it's on your phone, on your notes, in a journal, just really take, 24 or 48 hours and write down every thought that you have that's good or bad about yourself or about anybody else. And then at the end of the, I like to say 48 hours if you can, at the end of the 48 hours, go through and put a P or an N beside each statement, which represents a positive thought or a negative thought. And then at the bottom of your page or bottom of your notes on your phone, you tally them. You put a P equals how many P's, count them all up, tally them at the bottom, do the same thing with the N. And all you do is you don't judge, all you do is notice. It's just about becoming a noticer and noticing what you see, and simply noticing what you see will cause a shift in your subconscious mind to start moving towards what you actually desire most in your life. You don't have to do anything. It's just observing. And there's a book called Andy Andrews wrote this book called The Noticer a long time ago, years ago. And I read that book and it changed my perspective of life, on how this little things in our life that we focus on, that we notice, that most people aren't acutely aware enough in their surroundings that even notice things that happen. And it's about becoming more noticeable of, what are you thinking? How are you acting? How is your body language? How is your eye contact? How are you holding your head? Do you use your hands when you're talking, right? It's like all these things. What is the tone of your voice? Are you talking fast, or are you talking really distinctly and clearly and defined, like very slowly, so that people can take in everything you're saying? So there's a difference. Like, just if you just heard when I was talking faster to when I switched my speech to start speaking slower, your brain slows down to listen, to process, to integrate what I'm saying. So it's just about noticing, about your mindset, writing down, doing that exercise. I could literally give 100 suggestions, but those are the top 2 that I would narrow them down to, just for brevity's sake here for the podcast.
Yeah, those are awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, that's all of the questions that we have for today. You covered so many amazing topics, from all the way from perspective, purpose, perfectionism, mindset. I think you're definitely leaving our listeners with so much to think about, consider, and definitely incorporate into their lives. And whether it's a university student or someone older, I know my mom listens to these, so I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear. But I think anyone can incorporate everything you've talked about in their lives, and you are such a huge inspiration. And we want to thank you again just for taking the time to share your story and your tips and everything with us today. It was a really great experience for us.
Thank you so much, Alex and Taylor. It's been a pleasure, and I wish both of you the best in all of your university studies. And it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to get to know both of you.
Thank you so much.